I remember the first time I heard about Jonelle Matthews. It was the kind of story that stops you in your tracks, a seemingly ordinary evening that turned into a mystery no one could have imagined. A 12-year-old girl, full of life, talent, and promise, disappears without a trace from the safety of her own home. It wasn't in a remote, desolate place or some uncharted wilderness. This happened in the middle of a quiet neighborhood, where people left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors. Jonelle had just finished singing in her school choir, her voice filling the room with the warmth of the holiday season. Friends and family were all around, the kind of evening you'd expect to be filled with nothing but smiles and joy. But less than 2 hours later, her home was eerily empty. Her shoes were left near the heater, a quiet testament to her recent presence. The garage door was open, snow on the ground undisturbed, except for footprints leading up to her window. I can't imagine what her father felt walking into that house. The silence, so deafening, it must have made his heart race. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than any cry for help. The kind of silence that told you something was wrong. Over the years, her face stared back at millions from milk cartons, the symbol of a collective hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd come home. But those years turned into decades, and the hope turned into questions. How could someone vanish like that? Who could carry such a secret? And why was the truth so elusive? Today, I'm going to take you through Jonelle's story. The events that led to her disappearance, the decades of unanswered questions, and the shocking revelations that came to light over 35 years later. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about a family shattered, a community searching for answers, and the relentless pursuit of justice. And now I ask you, what do you think happens to a family when a child goes missing for so long? How does a community carry on while living with the shadow of such a mystery? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And as we unravel this case, keep your mind open, because this story is one you'll never forget. Jonelle Renee Matthews was born on February 9, 1972, in Santa Barbara, California. From the very beginning, her story was one of love and family. She was adopted as a baby by Jim and Gloria Matthews, a couple who dreamed of providing a warm and nurturing home. For Jonelle, this home became her safe haven, a place where she grew up surrounded by care and encouragement. When Jonelle was still young, the family relocated to Greeley, Colorado, a quiet town with a close-knit community. It was the kind of place where people knew each other by name, where neighbors exchanged smiles, and where children played freely in the streets. Greeley was meant to be a fresh start for the Matthews family, and for Jonelle, it was a world full of possibilities. At Franklin Middle School, Jonelle thrived. She was a bright, talented, and spirited 12-year-old, full of energy and determination. Her love for singing made her an active member of the school choir, and it wasn't just a hobby, it was a passion. Jonelle's voice stood out, not just for its melodic tone, but for the way it reflected her joy and enthusiasm for life. She wasn't just talented, she was kind-hearted. Teachers described her as a friendly, approachable student who brought positivity into every room she entered. Her friends would later recount how Jonelle had an infectious laugh, a quick wit, and a way of making everyone feel included. Jonelle was the kind of girl whose presence could brighten a gloomy day, a child who loved to sing but also loved to give, whether it was through helping others or simply being a good friend. For her family, she was the glue that held everything together, a ray of light in their lives. But in a town like Greeley, where the Matthews family had built their life and where Jonelle had begun to flourish, her sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through the community. How could such a vibrant young girl, so full of life, vanish without a trace? This wasn't just a loss for her family. It was a loss for everyone who knew her. And it raises a question I'll ask you now. How do you think Jonel's community felt during her disappearance? Share your thoughts in the comments as we continue to unravel the details of this tragic story. December 20th, 1984, was supposed to be a night filled with joy and celebration. Jonel Matthews, just 12 years old, had been eagerly preparing for her school choir's Christmas concert at Intra-West Bank of Denver. It was the kind of event that brought the community together, a moment for students to shine and families to share in the festive spirit. That night, Jonel sang her heart out alongside her classmates, her voice a beautiful reminder of the holiday season's warmth. After the concert, at around 8:15 p.m., Jonel was driven home by her friend Deanna and Deanna's father, Russ Ross. It was a short ride, just a routine drop-off. When they arrived, the house was quiet. Jonel stepped out of the car, thanked them, and went inside. Everything seemed normal. She was home, safe, or so everyone thought. At 8:30 p.m., Jonel answered a phone call. It wasn't anything unusual, just someone leaving a message for her father. She wrote it down, hung up, and went back to what she was doing. That phone call would turn out to be the last confirmed interaction anyone had with her. An hour later, at 9:30 p.m., her father, Jim Matthews, returned home. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed the garage door was open. Strange, but not alarming. Perhaps Jonel had forgotten to close it. He walked inside, calling out for his daughter. The house was silent. In the family room, he saw her shoes placed neatly near the heater, as if she had been warming her feet. Her shawl was there too, but Jonel wasn't. The TV was off, the house was still, and that eerie silence began to set in. Jim's concern grew. This wasn't like Jonel. He began checking the house, room by room, calling her name. Nothing. When he stepped outside, he noticed footprints in the snow around the house, footprints that seemed to lead up to the windows. It was as if someone had been watching her. Yet, there were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. Jonel was simply gone. By 10:15 p.m., panic had set in. Jim called the police, reporting his daughter missing. Officers arrived quickly and began investigating. They combed through the house, looking for any clues that might explain what had happened. Those footprints in the snow were chilling, a silent witness to something unthinkable. The news spread fast. Friends, neighbors, and family members came together, searching, hoping, praying. But as the hours turned into days, the realization began to sink in. Jonel wasn't coming back, at least not anytime soon. It's hard to imagine the weight of that night, the unanswered questions, the overwhelming fear, and the helplessness of not knowing where to turn. And now, I ask you, what would you have done differently as her parent that night? Would you have called the police sooner? Would you have searched longer? Share your thoughts in the comments as we continue to unravel this tragic story. In the days and weeks following Jonel Matthews' disappearance, her family and the Greeley community were engulfed in a wave of desperation and grief. The initial searches turned up nothing, no clues, no suspects, no answers. It was as though Jonel had vanished into thin air. But what made her case unique was how it captured national attention in a way few cases had before. Jonel's disappearance coincided with the rise of a new movement aimed at finding missing children. In the early 1980s, milk cartons became a tool to raise awareness about these heartbreaking cases. Pictures of missing children were printed on the sides of milk cartons, turning an everyday household item into a platform for hope. Jonelle was among the first children to have her face featured in this campaign. Millions of Americans saw her photo every morning at their breakfast tables. For the Matthews family, it was a bittersweet development. On one hand, it meant Jonelle's story was reaching people across the country. On the other, it was a painful reminder of their worst nightmare, that their daughter was missing and no one knew where she was. Every time they saw her photo, it brought a mix of hope and heartbreak. Jonelle's case reached even higher levels of attention when President Ronald Reagan himself mentioned her in a speech on March 7, 1985. In the speech, Reagan highlighted the national concern over missing children, using Jonelle's disappearance as a poignant example. For a brief moment, Jonelle's name was spoken in homes and communities far beyond Greeley. Her story symbolized the fear and urgency parents across the nation felt when thinking about the safety of their own children. But as the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, the emotional toll on Jonelle's family and the Greeley community grew heavier. The Matthews family struggled to hold onto hope while grappling with the reality that every lead seemed to go cold. Meanwhile, neighbors in Greeley were gripped by fear. If something like this could happen to Jonelle in their safe, quiet town, who might be next? The milk carton campaign was a powerful tool of its time, but it wasn't without its critics. Some argued it heightened fear more than it helped, while others believed it gave families like the Matthews a fighting chance. So now I ask you, do you remember the milk carton campaign? What do you think about its impact? Did it help, or was it simply a reminder of how vulnerable we all are? For 35 years, the question of what happened to Jonelle Matthews lingered, haunting her family, her friends, and the entire Greeley community. Decades passed without answers, and for many, it felt as though the truth might never come to light. But on July 24, 2019, everything changed. That day began like any other for a group of construction workers installing a pipeline about 15 miles southeast of Greeley. As they worked, digging into the earth, one of them uncovered something that brought their progress to an abrupt halt. Buried beneath the soil were human remains. The authorities were called immediately, and as forensic experts arrived, the site became a focal point of investigation. The remains were carefully examined, and soon, DNA analysis provided a heartbreaking confirmation. These were the remains of Jonelle Matthews. After 35 years of uncertainty, she had finally been found. But with that confirmation came the painful truth. Jonelle had been murdered. The forensic report revealed that her cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. For her family, this discovery was devastating. After years of hoping, praying, and waiting for answers, they were now faced with a grim reality. The news rippled through the community of Greeley, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. For those who had lived in the area during Jonelle's disappearance, the revelation brought a flood of emotions, grief, anger, and even guilt. People remembered the little girl who had once been the heart of her choir, the friendly and vibrant student whose absence had left a void. Finding her remains provided a form of closure, but it also raised new questions. Who had taken her life, and why? The Matthews family, after enduring decades of anguish, was forced to relive the pain of Jonelle's loss. Yet, amidst the sorrow, there was a small sense of relief in knowing that she had been found and that the search for justice could finally begin. Imagine what it must have felt like for her family to receive this news after so many years. How do you think this discovery impacted them? Did it provide any comfort, or did it reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments as we move forward in uncovering the pursuit of justice for Jonelle. The search for answers in Jonelle Matthews' case didn't end with the discovery of her remains. In fact, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would take years to unfold, involving a suspect who seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. His name, Stephen Dana Pankey. Pankey was no stranger to Greeley. He had once been a resident of the town, living only 3 miles from the Matthews family's home. At the time of Jonelle's disappearance, Pankey was a youth pastor at the church the Matthews family attended. For years, he had been part of the same tight-knit community, yet his connection to Jonelle's case would remain hidden, at least until he began to make strange claims about it. In the years following Jonelle's disappearance, Pankey would intermittently reach out to law enforcement and the media, offering unsolicited information about the case. He spoke as though he knew more than he was letting on, making claims that investigators soon found were not only contradictory, but suspicious. His statements seemed to shift over time, and the more he spoke, the more inconsistencies began to emerge. Pankey had a habit of inserting himself into the narrative, almost as though he craved attention for his supposed knowledge of the crime. His actions raised eyebrows, but it was his behavior that truly sparked the investigation. Pankey had run for governor in Idaho not once, but twice, once in 2014 and again in 2018. A political figure with ambitions far beyond Greeley, his runs for office seemed to heighten the public's curiosity about his life. His background as a youth pastor and his history in the town made him an unlikely suspect at first, but the contradictions in his statements and his strange involvement in the case soon had investigators questioning his true motives. In the years following Jonelle's disappearance, Pankey's increasingly bizarre claims raised red flags. He spoke about having been in the area on the night of Jonelle's disappearance, but the specifics of his story never lined up. His changing story seemed to point towards someone desperately trying to distance himself from the crime. But why would he keep talking about it if he had nothing to do with her disappearance? As investigators dug deeper, they began to scrutinize his every word. The more they uncovered, the more suspicious his behavior became. Pankey's connection to Jonelle's case was no longer just a passing curiosity. It had now become a point of focus in the investigation. His inconsistencies only fueled the growing belief that he knew more than he was willing to admit. On the surface, Pankey's public life as a former pastor and politician seemed far removed from the brutal crime that had taken place in his own backyard. But the deeper law enforcement dug, the clearer it became that Pankey's involvement in the case wasn't just coincidence. It was a dark shadow hanging over Jonelle's memory. Now, as we look at his bizarre behavior and contradictory claims, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Pankey's constant claims helped or hurt his case? Did his behavior push investigators to investigate him further, or was it simply a red herring? After years of dead ends and uncertainty, Stephen Pankey's involvement in Jonelle Matthews' case finally took a decisive turn in 2020. On October 13, 2020, Pankey was indicted on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping in connection with Jonelle's death. The indictment came after a lengthy investigation that revealed more troubling details about his actions, his behavior, and the inconsistencies in his statements. Pankey, who had long been a person of interest in the case, was now facing formal charges for a crime he had spent years distancing himself from. The pursuit of justice for Jonelle and her family was now entering its final stages. Pankey's first trial, held in 2021, was a tense and high-stakes affair. The prosecution had gathered significant evidence linking him to the crime, but the defense was determined to create doubt in the minds of the jury. Throughout the trial, The case seemed to hang in the balance, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. But in the end, after days of deliberations, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The result was a hung jury, and the judge declared a mistrial. For Jonel's family, this was a crushing setback. After so many years of waiting, they found themselves forced to endure the uncertainty of a second trial. But in 2022, the justice system would not be so easily deterred. The retrial began, and the stakes were higher than ever. This time, the prosecution was determined to bring a final resolution to Jonel's case. Evidence that had been overlooked in the first trial was presented in a more compelling way. Witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and the critical inconsistencies in Pankey's own statements all worked in the prosecution's favor. The case that had once seemed like an unsolvable puzzle was now beginning to fit together. Finally, after years of waiting, the verdict was delivered. Stephen Pankey was found guilty of felony murder and second-degree kidnapping. It was a landmark moment for Jonel's family, who had endured over 3 decades of not knowing what happened to their daughter. The guilty verdict was a long-awaited moment of justice, but it was not the end of the road. Pankey was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole. For Jonel's family, it was a bittersweet victory. Though the conviction brought them some sense of closure, it could never bring their daughter back. The importance of this conviction cannot be overstated. After 35 years of searching, hoping, and grieving, Jonel's family finally had the answers they had longed for. The trial and eventual conviction marked the culmination of years of tireless effort from law enforcement, the community, and Jonel's family. But perhaps most importantly, it proved that justice, no matter how long delayed, could still be served. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe justice was served in this case? Was the conviction enough to bring closure to Jonel's family? Or do you think the sentence was too lenient? Why or why not? The conviction of Stephen Pankey in 2022, though a long-awaited moment of justice, did not erase the years of heartache that Jonel Matthews' family had endured. For her mother, Gloria Matthews, the relief was palpable, but it came with mixed emotions. She expressed her thoughts powerfully. God is the only one who can forgive evil, and I feel that this is evil. After decades of uncertainty, Gloria's words reflected the profound emotional toll the case had taken on her and her family. The pain of losing a child never truly fades, and while the conviction brought some sense of closure, it could not undo the years of heartache. Jonel's sister, Jennifer Mogensen, shared a similar sentiment. She had spent much of her life in limbo, never truly knowing what happened to her sister. Now, with the conviction, Jennifer could finally feel that some measure of justice had been achieved. But as she reflected on the decades of waiting and hoping, the reality set in that nothing could ever bring Jonel back. The impact on her family was deep, and the pain of that loss would never go away. But in some ways, the verdict helped to ease the burden they had carried for so long. But the impact of Jonel's case reached far beyond her family. The Greeley community, which had rallied around the Matthews family in the years following Jonel's disappearance, was forever changed by the events that unfolded. The community's involvement in the search for Jonel, their collective grief, and their unwavering support for the Matthews family highlighted the bonds that can form in times of crisis. For many in Greeley, Jonel's story became a symbol of the painful reality of missing children and the relentless pursuit of justice, no matter how long it takes. The case also had a broader impact, inspiring families of other missing children to continue their search for answers. Jonel's story, which had started as a heartbreaking mystery, became a beacon of hope for those still waiting for justice. Her case showed that no matter how much time passes, the truth can still be uncovered, and justice can still be served. The conviction of Pankey was not just the resolution of one family's tragedy. It was a statement to every family that their search for answers is worth fighting for. As we reflect on the ripple effect of Jonelle Matthews' case, I want to ask you this. How can communities better support families in cases like this? What can be done to prevent the agony of uncertainty and to ensure that justice is served as quickly as possible? As we come to the end of Jonelle Matthews' case, we reflect on the profound journey this story has taken, from a 12-year-old girl's disappearance in 1984 to the discovery of her remains in 2019, and finally, to the conviction of Stephen Pankey in 2022. What began as a heartbreaking mystery, with years of unanswered questions and immense pain for her family, ultimately found a measure of closure. The resolution of this case speaks to the enduring strength of Jonelle's family and the determination of the investigators who refused to give up, no matter how long the road was. This case is a testament to the power of persistence, reminding us that even cold cases, no matter how old, can still be solved. It shows that justice can still be achieved, even after decades of uncertainty. Jonelle Matthews' family had to endure 35 years of heartache, but in the end, the truth came to light. Her case underscores the importance of never giving up, whether it's a family member looking for answers or a community working to ensure that no one is forgotten. The impact of this case extends beyond just the Matthews family and Greeley. It's a reminder to us all to remain vigilant in our own communities. Every missing person, every unsolved case deserves attention. As we go about our daily lives, it's important to remember that someone somewhere is still waiting for justice, and that our awareness and support can make a difference. So now I turn to you. What other cold cases do you think deserve this kind of attention? Let us know in the comments, and let's continue to shine a light on those who still need answers. If you found Jonelle Matthews' story compelling, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories like this. Your support helps us keep these important conversations going.